Have you ever heard a story so shocking, so unexpected, that it completely changes the way you see God? Imagine traveling hundreds of miles to confront someone you once admired, a man whose books shaped your faith, a man whose teachings inspired your future, a man you considered one of the greatest religious scholars alive. Now imagine discovering that the rumors were true. He had publicly declared that he was following Jesus Christ. And then imagine that one conversation with that man would eventually lead you down a path that could cost you everything. Your reputation, your future, your family, your dreams, and perhaps even your life. What you're about to hear is not an ordinary testimony. It is a story of sacrifice, heartbreak, searching, unexpected encounters, and a journey that transformed 3 young men forever. If you believe Jesus still changes lives today, take a moment to subscribe and join this growing family of faith. And stay with me until the very end, because what happened next completely changed everything. This story begins far from Egypt, far from universities, far from theological debates. It begins in a forgotten village surrounded by dust, heat, and hardship. A place called El-Kara. Most people had never heard its name. The roads were rough. The summers were brutal. The desert winds often swept through the village carrying sand across small concrete homes. Life there was simple. And life there was hard. It was in this village that my twin brother Hassing and I were born. We entered the world only minutes apart. But from the beginning, people joked that we shared the same heart. Where one went, the other followed. Where one worked, the other worked. Where one dreamed, the other dreamed. We were inseparable. Our father, Abdullah, was one of the poorest men in the village. He worked wherever work could be found. Some days he repaired farming tools. Other days he carried supplies for merchants. Sometimes he labored from sunrise until dark only to earn enough money to feed the family for a single day. There were weeks when work disappeared entirely. There were nights when uncertainty sat at our dinner table like an unwanted guest. But despite his poverty, my father carried something powerful. A dream. You see, unlike many fathers, my father never attended school. Not once. As a young boy, he had been forced into labor before he ever learned how to read. When official documents required a signature, he pressed his thumbprint onto the paper because he couldn't write his own name. That pain never left him. I still remember one evening when Hassing and I were about 10 years old. The sun had disappeared behind the desert horizon. The sky glowed orange and purple. And our father sat outside the house staring silently at the stars. Something felt different. As we sat beside him, I noticed tears in his eyes. I had never seen my father cry. Not once. "Baba, what's wrong?" I asked quietly. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he looked at us. And what he said that night would shape the rest of our lives. "I do not want your life to become my life." His voice trembled. He pointed toward the distant horizon. "There is a bigger world beyond this village. I never had the chance to see it, but one day you will." I listened carefully. My brother sat frozen beside me. "I never learned to read," my father continued. "But you will read." His eyes filled with emotion. "I never sat in a classroom. But you will." The pain in his voice was impossible to ignore. Then he said something I have never forgotten. "I could not chase my dreams, but I will spend every drop of strength I have helping you chase yours." Those words became a fire inside us. From that day forward, Hassing and I became determined. Every morning before sunrise we worked. We carried water. We cleaned animal shelters. We helped neighbors. Then we rushed to school. While other children played during breaks, we studied. While others rested, we reviewed lessons. While others slept, we stayed awake reading by dim lights late into the night. Our mother often worried. "You boys need rest," she would say. But we always gave the same answer. "We can rest later." As we grew older, another passion began to shape our lives. Faith. The local imam quickly noticed our dedication. We memorized religious texts rapidly. We asked endless questions. We spent hours discussing theology. Soon people throughout neighboring villages began talking about us. "These boys will become great scholars one day." Those words filled our father with pride. But behind every achievement stood sacrifice. There were nights when food was scarce. Nights when our father quietly skipped meals so his children could eat. He never admitted it, but we knew. One winter evening I woke up thirsty. As I walked through the house, I noticed a faint light. There sat my father alone at the table. He was counting a small stack of worn banknotes. And again. And again. The amount was tiny. Yet his face carried enormous concern. I quietly returned to bed. The next morning I told Hussing what I had seen. Neither of us said much. We didn't need to. In that moment we made a promise. No matter how difficult the road became, we would succeed. Not for ourselves. For him. Years passed. Our grades continued rising. Teachers praised our discipline. Visiting scholars encouraged us. The village celebrated every achievement. And then one scorching afternoon, everything changed. A letter arrived. At first it looked ordinary. Just an envelope. Nothing more. But within that envelope was news that would transform our future forever. When Hussing and I approached our home, we noticed a crowd gathered outside. My heart immediately sank. In a poor village, crowds often meant tragedy. We rushed forward. Then we saw our father sitting beneath an old tree. His hands were shaking. His eyes were red. And clutched tightly in his hands was an envelope. My mother stood nearby wiping tears from her face. A teacher was standing beside her. Neighbors whispered among themselves. Something had happened. But what? My father slowly stood. Without speaking, he handed me the envelope. I looked down. The seal on the letter instantly caught my attention. One of the most respected Islamic universities in Egypt. My heartbeat quickened. The world suddenly felt silent. I opened the letter. Read the first few lines. And froze. My mouth opened. But no words came out. What is it? Hussing asked urgently. I looked up. Tears filled my eyes. We got it. What? The scholarship. For a moment nobody moved. Then everything exploded. The village erupted in celebration. Men shouted prayers of gratitude. Women cried openly. Children jumped with excitement. Neighbors embraced one another. Because somehow, against all odds, 2 boys from one of the poorest families in the village had been selected for one of the most competitive scholarship programs available. And as everyone celebrated around us, my father simply stood there weeping. The sacrifices, the sleepless nights, the skipped meals, the years of labor. For the first time, he was seeing the fruit of it all. But none of us knew that Egypt would become far more than a place of education. It would become the place where everything we believed would be challenged. The place where impossible questions would emerge. The place where 3 young scholars would come face to face with a decision that would change their lives forever. And it would all begin with a rumor so shocking that nobody wanted to believe it. The morning we left Al-Qahira remains one of the clearest memories of my life. Before sunrise, nearly the entire village gathered at the small bus station. Old men who had watched us grow up. Women who had known our family for years. Children who looked at us the way we once looked at older students. Everyone came. Everyone wanted to say goodbye. As the old bus pulled into view, reality suddenly became painful. This wasn't a dream anymore. We were leaving. Leaving our family. Leaving our home. Leaving the only world we had ever known. My mother embraced us tightly. Tears streamed down her face. She whispered prayers over us again and again. Then my father stepped forward. For several seconds, he simply stared at us. No words. No speeches. Just silence. A father looking at the sons he had sacrificed everything for. Finally, he placed one hand on each of our shoulders. His eyes were wet. But his voice remained steady. You are carrying more than your own future. We nodded. You are carrying the dreams of every child in this village who thinks poverty is the end of the story. I felt my throat tighten. Then my father pulled us into his arms. And quietly whispered words I would never forget. If I never become anything in this world, I already have enough. He paused. Because I have seen my sons rise higher than I ever could. Moments later, the bus doors closed. The engine roared to life. And as we pulled away, I looked through the rear window. My father remained standing exactly where we had left him, growing smaller, and smaller, and smaller, still waving, still watching, still believing. What none of us knew then was that the journey ahead would challenge everything we thought we knew about God. And somewhere else in Saudi Arabia, another young man was beginning a journey that would soon collide with ours. A young man named Khaled Al-Mutari. And together, our lives would become connected by a story none of us could have imagined. The first weeks in Egypt felt like stepping into another universe. Nothing had prepared us for the size of the city. The crowds, the noise, the endless movement of people. Back home, everyone knew everyone. In Egypt, thousands of students filled the streets around the university every day. Languages and accents blended together. Students arrived from different nations. Scholars walked between lecture halls. Bookstores lined entire streets. The atmosphere felt electric. Everywhere you turned, people were debating theology, history, and religious ideas. At first, Hassing and I felt completely overwhelmed. For the first time in our lives, we weren't special. We weren't known. We weren't the village prodigies. We were simply two students among thousands. And that reality pushed us harder than ever. Every morning we arrived early. Every evening we stayed late. While others relaxed, we studied. While others socialized, we read. We carried our father's sacrifice with us everywhere. Failure wasn't an option. Then one evening in the university library, everything changed. I was sitting with Hassing at a long wooden table surrounded by towering shelves of books. The library was unusually quiet. Only the occasional turning of pages interrupted the silence. Across from us sat a young man we had never met before. He was buried beneath a mountain of books. At one point, several books slid from his stack and crashed onto the floor. Without thinking, Hassing stood to help. The young man laughed. We laughed. A conversation started. And before we knew it, hours had passed. His name was Khaled Al-Mutari. Like us, he came from Saudi Arabia. Like us, he came from a poor family. Like us, he had earned his scholarship through years of hard work. And like us, he dreamed of becoming a respected Islamic scholar. The similarities were almost unbelievable. Within days, we became friends. Within weeks, we felt like brothers. Soon we were doing everything together. Studying, attending lectures, eating meals, discussing theology late into the night. Many students on campus began calling us the Three Scholars. At first it was a joke. Then the nickname stuck. Everywhere we went, we were together. And among all the scholars we admired, one man stood above the rest. One name inspired more respect than any other. Sheikh Omar Al-Faruq. To us, he wasn't merely a teacher. He was a legend. His books were studied throughout the Islamic world. His lectures attracted enormous audiences. His teachings influenced countless students, including us. Many nights we discussed his writings. Many of our academic goals had been shaped by his work. In our minds, Sheikh Omar represented everything we hoped to become. Wise, respected, influential, faithful. If someone had told us then that his name would soon shake our world, we would have laughed. But that is exactly what happened. It began on what seemed like an ordinary morning. Students filled the university courtyard. Groups gathered before class. Conversations echoed across the campus. Everything appeared normal. Until the whispers started. At first, nobody paid attention. A few students huddled together looking at their phones. Then more students gathered. And more. And more. Soon entire groups were talking. Teachers exchanged uneasy glances. Faces looked confused. Concerned. Even frightened. Something was happening. Khaled noticed it first. "What is going on?" he asked. A student hurried past us. His face looked pale. Khaled stopped him. "What happened?" The student hesitated, then looked directly at us. His expression was strange, almost shocked. "You haven't heard?" "Heard what?" I asked. The student swallowed hard, then quietly spoke words that felt impossible. "Sheikh Omar has accepted Jesus Christ." Silence. Complete silence. For a moment I thought I had misheard him. Surely not. Not Sheikh Omar. Not the man whose books filled our shelves. Not the man thousands admired. Not the scholar who had spent decades defending his beliefs. Khaled immediately shook his head. No. His voice was firm. That's impossible. Many students felt exactly the same. Rumors spread constantly. People exaggerated things. Misunderstandings happened. Surely this was another false report. Surely. But as the day continued, more reports emerged. More confirmations appeared. More sources repeated the same story. By evening, the entire campus was talking about one thing. And one thing only. Sheikh Omar Al-Faruq, the respected scholar, the famous teacher, the man we admired, had publicly declared himself a follower of Jesus. That night, the three of us sat inside our dormitory room. Nobody touched their books. Nobody studied. Nobody knew what to say. Finally, Khaled broke the silence. I don't understand. Neither did we. Hours passed. Questions filled the room. How could this happen? What changed his mind? Had he been deceived? Was there some explanation nobody understood? The more we talked, the more confused we became. Finally I spoke. We need answers. Hassing nodded immediately. Khaled looked up. So what do we do? I took a deep breath, then answered. We ask him ourselves. The room became silent, because we all knew what that meant. Traveling across Egypt, meeting the man at the center of the controversy, looking him directly in the eyes, and hearing his explanation. Not from rumors, not from headlines, not from angry debates. From him, personally. The decision was made. Within days, we would begin a journey that none of us would ever forget. A journey that started with questions, but would eventually lead somewhere far more dangerous, far more personal, and far more life-changing than we could possibly imagine. Because the man we were preparing to confront was about to tell us a story involving years of struggle, years of hidden questions, and an encounter he claimed changed everything. What he would reveal inside that small apartment would become the first crack in the foundation of everything we believed, and none of us were prepared for what was waiting behind that door. 3 days later, we were on a bus heading across Egypt. The journey should have felt exciting. Instead, it felt heavy. The atmosphere between us was unlike anything we had experienced before. Usually, our trips were filled with conversation, debates, laughter, plans for the future. But this time was different. This time, silence traveled with us. The bus rolled through endless stretches of desert. Small towns appeared and disappeared beyond the windows. The afternoon sun painted the landscape in shades of gold and orange. Yet none of us paid much attention. Our minds were somewhere else. Every few minutes, one of us would mention something from Sheikh Omar's lectures. Then the conversation would die. Because every memory created another question. Every answer seemed to create 3 more. Finally, Khaled broke the silence. What if the rumors are false? Hassing looked toward the window. I hope they are. So do I admitted. But deep inside, I wasn't sure anymore. Too many reports had confirmed the same story. Too many people were talking about it. Something had happened. The only question was why. As the hours passed, nervousness slowly settled over us. For years, Sheikh Omar had been more than a scholar. He had been a role model, a source of inspiration, a symbol of certainty. And now that certainty was under attack. We didn't realize it then, but we were about to discover something uncomfortable. Sometimes the questions we fear most are the questions that change us forever. Late that afternoon, we finally arrived. The city was quieter than we expected. Nothing dramatic. Nothing unusual. No protests. No crowds. No reporters. Just ordinary streets filled with ordinary people. Yet beneath the normal appearance, something felt different. The address led us to a modest apartment building. We stopped outside. And suddenly nobody moved. For several seconds, the 3 of us simply stood there, staring. The moment had finally arrived. My heart pounded. I could hear it in my ears. Khaled folded his arms tightly across his chest. Hassing stared at the entrance. None of us wanted to admit it, but we were afraid. Afraid of what we might hear. Afraid of what we might discover. Afraid that the rumors might actually be true. Finally, Khaled stepped forward. Let's do this. Slowly, we approached the door. Each step felt heavier than the last. When we reached it, I raised my hand and knocked. Twice. Then silence. A few moments later, footsteps approached from inside. The door opened. And there he stood, Sheikh Omar. For a brief second, nobody spoke. He looked older than we remembered. Not dramatically older, just tired. His face carried the weight of someone who had walked through a storm. Yet there was something else too. Something unexpected. A calmness we hadn't anticipated. His eyes moved from one face to another, recognizing each of us immediately. Then he smiled gently. Hussing. Khaled. And you. His voice was warm, not defensive, not angry, not hostile, just warm. Please come in. The three of us exchanged uncertain glances, then stepped inside. The apartment surprised us. For a man once known throughout the Islamic world, it was remarkably simple. Bookshelves lined the walls. Stacks of papers rested on small tables. Several unopened letters sat in one corner. Dusty sunlight streamed through a narrow window. The room felt quiet, almost lonely, and for some reason, that affected me deeply. This wasn't the home of a man chasing fame. This wasn't the home of someone seeking attention. If anything, it looked like the home of someone who had lost a great deal. We sat down. Nobody spoke. The silence stretched. Finally, I gathered enough courage. Sheikh. My voice felt strangely weak. We came because we need to know if it's true. The room became completely still. Outside, distant traffic drifted through the open window. Inside, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Nobody looked away. Then Sheikh Omar slowly nodded. Yes. One word. Just one. But it hit us like a wave. Yes. The rumors were true. The reports were true. The whispers were true. The scholar we admired had publicly become a follower of Jesus. For several seconds, nobody said anything. Khaled lowered his eyes. Hussing stared at the floor. My stomach twisted into knots. I had spent years studying this man's teachings. Years admiring his scholarship. And now I couldn't even understand him. Seeing our shock, Sheikh Omar sighed softly. Then he said something none of us expected. I'm sorry. We looked up. Confused. He continued. I know this is difficult for you. His voice carried genuine compassion. I know you're confused. I know you're disappointed. I know many of your questions because I once asked the same questions myself. Something about his honesty disarmed us. This wasn't the reaction we expected. We had prepared for arguments, debates, defensiveness. Instead, we found humility. For a long moment, he simply looked at us. Then leaned forward slightly. If you're willing to listen? He paused. I'll tell you what happened. The room became silent once again. We nodded. And then he began. It started nearly 2 years ago. His voice was calm, measured, careful. At that time, my life appeared successful. Thousands attended his lectures. His books were selling. His influence was growing. Students sought his guidance. Leaders requested his advice. From the outside, everything looked perfect. But appearances can be deceiving. Privately, he was struggling. Not with fame. Not with success. With questions. Questions he couldn't answer. Questions that refused to disappear. At first, he ignored them. Then he researched them. Then he buried himself in study. But instead of disappearing, the questions grew stronger. More persistent. More difficult. There were nights, he said quietly, when I barely slept. His eyes drifted toward the window. I kept telling myself I would eventually find peace. But I didn't. The room remained silent. We listened carefully. Every word mattered. Then his voice became softer. One night, everything changed. Immediately, our attention sharpened. The atmosphere shifted. Even the air in the room felt different. He paused, as though reliving the memory. Then continued. I was alone. I had been praying, searching, struggling. And during that time, he stopped again. Emotion filled his eyes. When it happened, none of us interrupted. None of us dared. The room was completely still. Then he spoke words that sent chills through my body. I experienced something I cannot explain away. His voice trembled slightly. It was more real than any dream. More powerful than anything I had ever experienced. He looked directly at us. And I believe Jesus revealed himself to me. The words hung in the air. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Impossible. My heart pounded. Part of me wanted to reject everything immediately. But another part noticed something difficult to ignore. He wasn't speaking like someone telling a story. He was speaking like someone describing the most important moment of his life. His eyes weren't filled with excitement. They were filled with conviction. The kind that comes from personal experience. The kind that cannot be borrowed from books, or arguments, or debates. Then he surprised us again. I didn't immediately change my beliefs. We exchanged glances. That wasn't what we expected. I spent months investigating. He gestured toward the bookshelves. I studied. I compared sources. I examined historical records. I challenged every conclusion. I searched for reasons to prove myself wrong. His voice became emotional, because I knew what this could cost me. And suddenly we understood. This wasn't merely a theological discussion. This was personal, painfully personal. Every conclusion carried consequences. Every discovery threatened his reputation. Every step forward risked losing everything he had built. Then he leaned back, and slowly shared the truths that had affected him most deeply. As he spoke, the room seemed to grow quieter. And with every word, the foundation beneath our certainty began to shake. Because what he said next would stay with us long after we left that apartment. And would eventually force us to confront questions we never expected to ask. The room was silent. Not the kind of silence that comes when people have nothing to say. This was the kind of silence that comes when every word matters. Sheikh Omar sat across from us. His Bible rested on the table beside him. The afternoon sunlight filtered through the window. Dust floated through the air. And for the next several hours, the man we had traveled hundreds of miles to confront shared the story that changed his life forever. I did not arrive at my decision quickly, he said. I fought it. His eyes filled with emotion. I resisted it. I questioned everything. Because I knew exactly what it would cost. Then he explained that as he continued studying, several teachings of Jesus began affecting him deeply. At first, he tried to dismiss them. Then he tried to explain them away. But the more he examined them, the more they challenged him. The first was Jesus' command to love even those who oppose you. Not tolerate them. Not merely avoid harming them. Love them. Pray for them. Bless them. Forgive them. The radical nature of that teaching unsettled him. The second was the invitation into a personal relationship with God. Not merely religious duty. Not merely rituals. Not merely external performance. But genuine intimacy with the Creator. The third was the message of grace. The idea that no one is beyond God's mercy. No one is too broken. No one is too far gone. No one is beyond redemption. The fourth was Jesus' example of humility. The king who served. The teacher who washed feet. The leader who chose sacrifice. And the fifth was Jesus' relentless call to seek truth regardless of the personal cost. That last one changed everything, Sheikh Omar said quietly. Because eventually I realized I had to decide whether I loved truth more than comfort. The words hit me harder than I expected. Truth more than comfort. Truth more than reputation. Truth more than approval. Truth more than security. The room fell silent again. Then Sheikh Omar looked directly at us. His gaze moved from Khaled, to Hussein, to me. And then he said something I have never forgotten. I'm not asking you to agree with me today. We listened carefully. I'm asking you to search honestly. His voice remained calm. Ask difficult questions. Study deeply. Pray sincerely. And follow truth wherever it leads. Then he paused. Because there is life after death. And every person must decide where they stand before God. Those words stayed with us long after the conversation ended. Hours had passed. Yet somehow it felt like minutes. The sun was beginning to disappear beyond the city skyline. And as we stood to leave, I realized something disturbing. We had arrived expecting answers. Instead, we were leaving with questions. More questions than ever before. And deep inside, something had begun to change. The trip back to campus felt completely different. The same roads, the same desert, the same landscape. Yet everything felt unfamiliar. None of us spoke much. The conversation with Sheikh Omar replayed endlessly in my mind. And again. And again. By the time we returned to our dormitory, exhaustion had set in. Yet none of us wanted to sleep. We sat together long into the night discussing what we had heard. Sometimes we agreed. Sometimes we disagreed. Sometimes we simply stared into silence. Eventually, the room grew quiet. One by one we lay down. But sleep refused to come. My mind raced. Questions collided with emotions. Certainty wrestled with doubt. I stared into the darkness for what felt like hours. Then eventually, I drifted asleep. What happened next changed everything. That night, I experienced something unlike anything I had ever known. It was more vivid than an ordinary dream. More powerful than imagination. The experience felt incredibly real. In the dream, I encountered Jesus. The details are difficult to describe even today. What I remember most was not what I saw. It was what I felt. A depth of compassion I had never experienced before. It felt as though every fear inside me was being exposed. And yet, instead of condemnation, I encountered grace. When I woke up, my heart was pounding. The room was still dark. I sat upright in bed, trying to process what had happened, trying to explain it away, trying to convince myself it was nothing. Across the room, I noticed movement. Hussing was awake. Very awake. He was staring at me. His expression looked strange. Almost frightened. Almost amazed. Neither of us spoke for several moments. Finally, I broke the silence. I had a strange dream. Immediately, his eyes widened. So did I. A chill ran through my body. For the next hour, we compared our experiences. The details were different, but the message felt remarkably similar. Neither of us knew what to think. Neither of us knew what to do. But both of us knew one thing. Something was happening, and we could no longer ignore it. The following weeks became some of the most difficult weeks of our lives. The dreams alone were not enough. We wanted answers. Real answers. So we did what students do best. We studied. We researched. We asked questions. We read everything we could find. Late nights turned into early mornings. Conversations stretched for hours. Sometimes our findings challenged us. Sometimes they confused us. Sometimes they frightened us. Yet with every step forward, the conviction grew stronger. The journey that began with curiosity was becoming deeply personal. And eventually, we reached a crossroads. A moment where a decision had to be made. I remember one particular night. The room was quiet. Only a small lamp illuminated the space. Hussing sat across from me. Neither of us wanted to say the words. Because once spoken, everything would change. Finally, my brother broke the silence. I think we know. I nodded slowly. Tears filled my eyes. So do I. The decision terrified us. Not because we doubted it, but because we understood the consequences. Our family, our village, our future, everything could change, especially our father, the man who had sacrificed everything for us, the man whose dream had carried us all the way to Egypt. The thought of disappointing him felt unbearable. Many nights were filled with tears. Many prayers were whispered in secret. Many fears were carried alone. But eventually, after weeks of searching, praying, studying and wrestling, Hussing and I made our decision. We would follow Jesus. When we told Khaled, he became very quiet. For a long time, he said nothing. He had been wrestling with many of the same questions, experiencing many of the same struggles. Several weeks later, after his own season of searching, he reached the same conclusion. The three of us sat together in silence. The reality felt overwhelming. Everything had changed. Nothing would ever be the same again. We contacted Sheikh Omar. He welcomed us warmly. He listened carefully. He encouraged us to continue seeking God sincerely. And eventually he introduced us to a pastor. The pastor met privately with us. There was no pressure. No manipulation. Only patient conversations. Questions. Answers. Teaching. And over time, our faith deepened. Then the day arrived. The day we would publicly commit our lives to Jesus. There were no crowds. No cameras. No announcements. No headlines. Only a small gathering of believers. A simple room. Simple people. Simple worship. Yet for me, it became one of the most significant days of my life. As I stepped forward, my emotions overwhelmed me. Excitement. Uncertainty. Gratitude. Everything seemed to collide at once. And when I emerged from the water, I felt something difficult to describe. A peace. A freedom. A certainty. Not certainty about every question. Not certainty about the future. But certainty about the one I was following. As we left that gathering, I knew life would not become easier. In many ways, it would become harder. Much harder. And soon, those challenges began arriving. At first, we tried to keep everything private. We continued attending classes. Completing assignments. Calling home. Trying to maintain normal life. But normal life was disappearing. My father was the first to notice. One evening during a phone call, he suddenly stopped speaking. Then he asked a question that pierced my heart. "Son, is everything okay?" I hesitated. "Yes, Baba." But he wasn't convinced. "You sound different." The conversation haunted me. Because he was right. I was different. And he knew it. As the weeks passed, rumors began spreading. Some classmates noticed changes. Questions increased. Whispers circulated. And then one afternoon, everything intensified. Several missed calls appeared on my phone. All from my father. My stomach dropped. I immediately showed Hussing. Neither of us spoke. We already knew something was wrong. When we returned the call, my father answered immediately. His voice was serious. At first, he spoke normally. Studies. Then came the pause. A long pause. Finally he spoke. "People are telling me strange things." My heart froze. Rumors had reached the village. Someone claimed we were spending time with Christians. Someone claimed our beliefs had changed. Nobody knew exactly where the story started. But they were spreading. Then my father asked the question I had been dreading. "Tell me honestly." His voice softened. "Is there something you need to tell me?" I closed my eyes. The pain was overwhelming. The man I loved most. The man who sacrificed everything. The man who believed in us when nobody else did. And now I faced the possibility of hurting him deeply. After the call ended, I sat silently for a long time. Fear gripped my heart. The future suddenly felt uncertain. Yet that same evening, something beautiful happened. Believers from our small fellowship gathered around us. They prayed with us. Encouraged us. Reminded us that God remains faithful even when the road becomes difficult. And for the first time in many days, peace returned. Not because every problem was solved, but because we knew we were not alone. Months turned into years. The journey continued. Not perfectly. Not easily. But faithfully. We continued growing in our relationship with Jesus. We studied scripture. We prayed. We learned. We matured. And over time, we discovered something important. Faith is not about winning arguments. Faith is not about collecting information. Faith is not about titles, influence, or recognition. Faith is about knowing God, trusting Him, following Him, even when the cost feels high, even when the future feels uncertain, even when the path ahead remains unclear. Looking back now, I often think about that day outside Sheikh Omar's apartment. The day 3 young scholars arrived convinced they already had all the answers. The day a single conversation changed the direction of our lives. The day God began a journey none of us expected. And perhaps that is the lesson hidden inside this testimony. God often works in ways we never anticipate. Sometimes the questions we fear most become the doorway to transformation. Sometimes the struggles we resist become the path to breakthrough. And sometimes the very thing we think will destroy us becomes the thing God uses to draw us closer to Himself. So if you're watching today and you're carrying fear, don't give up. If you're battling doubt, don't stop seeking God. If you're facing rejection, don't lose hope. If you're struggling with sickness, keep praying. If If you're overwhelmed by pain, keep trusting. If you're walking through a season of uncertainty, remember this. God sees you. God knows your story. God has not forgotten you. The same Jesus who changed our lives is still changing lives today. The same Jesus who brings peace to troubled hearts still brings peace today. The same Jesus who meets people in their darkest moments is still meeting people today. No matter what you're facing, you are not alone. God's grace is greater than your fear. His mercy is greater than your failures. His love is greater than your pain. And His power is greater than any obstacle standing in your way. Before you leave, I want to pray for you. May God strengthen every person watching. May He heal broken hearts. May He provide for those in need. May He bring hope where there is despair, peace where there is anxiety, healing where there is sickness, and faith where there is doubt. If this testimony touched your heart, write, "Jesus changed my life," in the comments. And if you need prayer, leave your prayer request below. Our community would love to pray with you. Also share this video with someone who needs encouragement today. You never know whose life could be changed by hearing this testimony. And if God has done something amazing in your life, tell us your story in the comments. We would love to celebrate what God has done for you. Thank you for watching. And remember, no matter how impossible your situation may seem, with God, your story is not over.